lighting panel expansion. So the rationale behind this is that, first off, Vantage is best known for its lighting control technology. Having a working knowledge is vital so that you can know how enclosure-based load controls are added to the system, successfully be able to increase the size of the centralized system, and then be able to maximize the ratio between Infusion controller to loads, helping you be competitively priced when you're bidding out and installing a centralized system. So we'll go over the purpose of the secondary enclosure, and we'll talk about the bus and the wire length limits of that bus. We'll also talk about the switches. There's an A-B switch and also a termination switch. That settings do need to be taken care of on those secondary terminal boards. We also need to go over some of the valid combinations of how you can put in the secondary boards and how many of those that you can do. And then at the end we will get into Design Center and we will look at how to add those secondary enclosures and also how to move and assign and make adjustments to those enclosures within the Design Center software. So the first thing to talk about is the secondary enclosure wiring. First thing I want to point out, 200-foot maximum from the main enclosure to the end of each secondary run. Now, how many secondary runs can I have? If we look closely here, and I bring this into focus, you will see that you have 3 secondary enclosure runs here. So that I have secondary bus 2, 3, and 4. Now, with those runs, that means that I can have the main enclosure and then up to 6 secondary enclosures. So let's take a look at the identification of those secondary enclosures. In this diagram here, you see where I've got a group of panels, 2 additional panels that are 2A and 2B. So I would need to set the switches so that the first secondary board is set to A and the second board is set to B. Notice also something with these boards. The cable termination does not necessarily have to be in on the left and out on the right. That makes the most sense to me because I read a book left to right, but this is not a requirement, hence it is not called out specifically as an in or an out on the board. So when we talk about termination, we have a Vantage termination rule. Helps you to be able to remember across the entire board of different things that we terminate. If there is 1 or less cables, the termination is on. Otherwise, it is off. So with that rule and that example in mind, notice that secondary 2A is off because it has 2 cables into it, whereas secondary 2B only has the single cable in it, and so the termination is set to on. So let's take a look at multiple combinations. To begin with, I have my main enclosure, and then I'm going to add a second group. So my 2A and 2B are run from my bus termination 2. Notice that the positive and negative and ground are run to the 2A, and then my loop out from 2A over to 2B, and then the run is taken care of there, where I have my A-B switches set appropriately, and then I also set my termination like we just mentioned, where if there's 2 cables it is off, otherwise it is on. So something to point out here from this diagram, you can see that there is 1 wire that kind of takes off and comes back in. This is for my override. I do only have 1 screw terminal for override, which means that if I want to have all of those 6 possible locations, secondary enclosures, to have override capabilities, I would need to bring them together in the lower portion of the panel and wire nut those together so that I only have the 1 wire that comes up to that override screw down. So as we keep moving across, now I'm going to make sure that the termination rule is set. And then I'm going to go to my secondary enclosure 3A and 3B, and same thing where the cable, a single cable comes out of 3 and goes over to the A3 board, and then out of the A3 board over to the 3B board, and then I set my AB switch and my termination correctly. And now we're going to do an example with just a single secondary board. So instead of maximizing this system with a total of 6 secondary enclosures, we're only going to do it with 5. So here I have my 4A board where my cables come across, and I have the termination with my AB switch set to A, and then my termination is set to on because it has a single cable installed in it. So let's bring it all together. With a total of 6 secondary enclosures, that means I can have 7 total enclosures, one for the main enclosure where the Infusion controller is landed, and then 6 secondary enclosures. That means I can have up to 12 loads per module, 4 modules per enclosure, and that gives me a total of up to 336 loads, all controlled and run from one Infusion controller. So I just want to take a few moments and show you a couple things on the design center side of enclosures. Notice here on the left hand side I've selected enclosure view, and then on my view here I've selected any of these objects, the controller or the enclosure, the first enclosure. I can right click on that and add an enclosure. Is one of the ways that you can get secondary enclosures in here. I can also click on any of these placeholders. So for example, if I needed a enclosure on 3A, I could click an enclosure there and it would automatically add that. If I select the controller, notice I can see from the view here. Well, let's go ahead and shut down this object editor just so you can see. It will show me all of the enclosures that I have connected to that controller. So now the Vantage system is going to automatically add an enclosure for you if you're working along and adding the system together or putting the system together by adding loads, for example. If I come into this, and as you notice, I've been right clicking and I've populated all of those modules. Well, let's say I do an additional standard dimming module. I double click on that. It now has added a third enclosure and put it in the next available slot. Now, I can rearrange those. I can drag and drop. Notice now I can combine that to 2A and 2B. And so if I don't need to utilize the 3A position, I can do that. Or if I needed to have a 2A and a 3A, I can move those around like that. And now I have that set up however I need it. One other thing to note here, in case you've never seen this before, you can drag and move enclosure modules around as well. And so if the wiring gets done incorrectly, I can even do that with the loads. For example, I can move those from one panel to the next very easily. Any programming or anything else that I've got set up on that would track with that. The last thing I want to show you here is, if you notice I got rid of my object editor, if you go under view and down to restore factory docking, that will bring all of these panes back in the way that it was originally sent to you from the factory.